Hello everyone, I'm Laura Boyd and welcome to this episode of Beatson Talks, where I'm delighted to be joined by the very talented Gillian Shirreffs. How are you, Gillian?
I'm fine, thank you.
Now, did I pronounce that correctly?
You did. Shirreffs is a bit of an odd one. It's just like the easiest way to pronounce it. People try and do a really fancy
Shirreffs?
Yes, I know.
You could be very exotic.
It could be, but I'm not. Shirreffs.
Well, listen, it's lovely to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, tell me a wee bit about yourself.
Well, I am a writer. I live in Glasgow, about a mile from the Beatson, which was very handy quite recently. I have 3 crazy dogs and a husband. And I grew up, if we want to go that far back, just beneath the Campsie Hills in a little village that's too small to be a village, which was so I had a lovely upbringing where you just ran about up and down the hills.
It's so lovely.
For entertainment. It's very lovely.
Gorgeous out that way.
So that was pretty much our entertainment, was going up and down the hills and jumping in rivers, burns. And then moved to the big city when I was 18 to study English at Glasgow University and had a great time. And then moved to another big city, Edinburgh, to study HR. And I did that for a year. And then I started a career in HR management, which took me first of all to the States, and then it took me to France and Austria.
Very nice.
And then,
wow.
Over the years I've been backwards and forwards between Scotland and the States a number of times. So that's been great. Moved home for good and ever just before lockdown. So that was an interesting time to move back, but a really good time to move back because I have parents who appreciated me being in the same country as them during lockdown. And over the course of that, moving backwards and forwards, I also changed career. Because I always wanted to be a teacher. So at some point a wee bit later in life, I became an English teacher, which was lovely and thoroughly enjoyed it, but was diagnosed with MS. And much as I love teenagers, they have coughs and colds and didn't seem to be an ideal match for my relapsing, remitting MS. So that gave me time to do some writing, and so I then did a master's degree in creative writing and a doctorate in creative writing.
Oh my goodness.
So kind of whistle-stop tour around my life, Laura.
Non-stop. That is very impressive. But you mentioned the Beatson there. It's the
Yes.
Beatson podcast. So tell me a bit about how the Beatson came to be involved in your life.
So in the summer of 2021, I was in the shower and noticed a lump on my right breast. So I phoned up my GP. We were in the midst of lockdown, COVID. It was kind of that second summer of COVID, but still lots of restrictions. Got in touch with my GP, was very quickly seen at Gartnavel. And that very day, someone the very nice consultant drew a circle on my right breast in black felt tip pen. And I guess I knew what was coming from that point on. As somebody who's quite familiar with hospitals, with having had a neurological disease for a number of years, I knew it was probably things weren't going to go the way I would have wanted. And so by the end of that day, I had been told that there were 3 things that should not be there that were there. So 2 things in my breast and 1 thing under my arm. And the word cancer wasn't used initially. I was just told that. And I asked what I should tell my elderly parents. That was my first concern, how I should tell them this. And they said, just tell them there's something in your breast that shouldn't be there. I didn't mention my elderly parents were actually retired nurses, so that wasn't going to cut it for them.
They would know immediately.
Yes. So that was my first experience at the Beatson, was then when I was diagnosed through Gartnavel, and then I had my first meeting with my oncologist, Ian McPherson, who was amazing. So that was my first experience at the Beatson. And very quickly then I started my treatment with chemotherapy. I also had radiotherapy at the Beatson. I also had 2 surgeries at Gartnavel, but then I had 9 months of more chemo at the Beatson. So I became very familiar with the people and the building and think very highly of them, and I'm very grateful to them.
You get to know it so well, don't you? It's, it's somewhere you don't want to be, but it's also the best place to be in that instance. Take me back to that diagnosis, because I think I was kind of similar, like in that I was told, there was something, but not exactly what it was. But I knew deep down. It's such a strange feeling, isn't it? I think for me, it felt like the world just slowed down at that point. It was, slow motion, just this horrendous thing that you're trying to take in. How was it for you?
I think I probably bored people by consistently saying, but I thought I was one and done. I thought with having MS that very stupidly, like, why would I be one and done? But maybe that's something for people with another serious illness to think about. You may still also get another serious illness, but cancer is a very different disease. So with my MS, I've never felt frightened, but with a looming cancer diagnosis, I experienced fear, which is why we're going to be talking about the Beatson Cancer Charity. And that was something that I really needed help with, because all of a sudden, probably for one of the first times in my life, I actually felt afraid and needed to somehow get through that very unreal time without quite so much fear.
Yeah. I think you are, I think thankfully, because things have changed so much, there is so much hope. People are living so much longer. But still, I don't know if you're the same. When I was first told, you immediately think, death. Yeah, am I going to die? You're suddenly faced with that, aren't you?
Yes.
And that is terrifying.
Yeah, being faced with your mortality. And so one of the things that I was told at that very initial day when I had the mammogram and then an ultrasound, and then they did the thing where they take tissue samples from the 3 different areas that had things that shouldn't be there, and then more mammograms. So it was quite an involved day. And then when somebody finally sat me down, the lady with the black felt tip pen sat me down at the end of 4 hours or whatever of the process. And she said it's not like the 1950s, which was interesting to me because my dad lost his mum to breast cancer in the 1950s when he was a little boy. So it was kind of interesting that she said she used that phrase. Yeah. But what it immediately did was make me think my connection with breast cancer in the 1950s is my dad losing his mum at the very beginning of the 1950s. You can never speak for anybody else. I think like MS, it's such an individual experience, individual disease. But I certainly was faced with mortality and the sense of, like, I could see a film of life going on without me, which I had never experienced before. And I'm a bit gallus again. I think you live in that moment with that real awareness that things could result in that outcome. And then you just get a wee bit gallus as time goes on and forget that you're mortal again.
Yeah, and there is that completely. But this is where things like Beatson Cancer Charity have so many different arms that they can help you with. So how did you find out about the services on offer, and which services have you used?
So looking back, I struggle to really know exactly how I found it. I mean, I already knew about Beatson Cancer Charity just from being someone who's in the West End of Glasgow, in the west of Scotland, in Scotland. You kind of know about them. And I was aware that there was a charity attached. But the first service that I accessed was the telephone befriending service. And I think I mentioned that we were still in COVID times in terms of lockdown and restrictions. So everything that I did, I had to do on my own because we were still in that period where you couldn't have extra people with you. So there was, I think it might always be a lonely experience, but there was that additional bit of loneliness attached to it. And I immediately found myself having emergency admissions to the Queen Elizabeth because I've got a bit of an overactive immune system. With my first infusion of chemotherapy, I got sepsis. With my next one, I got another infection. And I had in that first 3 months, 5 emergency admissions. So it was all very stressful and I didn't want to upset family and friends by telling just how frightened I was, just how stressed I was. So I heard about this telephone befriending service and thought, well, maybe I can just download onto somebody else or offload onto somebody else. So that's what I did. I got in touch with Paul, who runs the service. I think it was his number and he's just brilliant. So he matched me up with Lauren, who was wonderful, and she would phone me once a week and we would just chat, not even necessarily about things, but sometimes during that initial period I got some moments of bad news throughout it that I didn't really want to upset other people with. So I was able to have Lauren as a listening ear and just be able to externally process that information and then kind of move on from having done that processing. So I found the telephone befriending service really useful. And it was over the telephone because of the times that we were in, but they've continued. So they started it because of COVID and they could no longer do their face-to-face befriending, but it's a service that now continues on. And it's very convenient for people who are unwell because you can do it from your own home, from your kitchen, which is what I would do. I would talk to Lauren from the kitchen and not disturb anybody else. So it was a brilliant service, and I would really recommend it to anyone who thinks that could be useful to them.
It's such a helpful thing, offloading to someone who's not connected to you.
Yes.
We've spoken about this in a few of the other podcasts, but it's that thing of protecting those you love, and you feel like you're taking that on as well, aren't you? You know, because you're very much going, I'll be fine, it'll be okay, but inside you're crumbling, but you don't want to offload that. And almost it's worse, it adds to it when you see them upset.
Yes.
So you need that outlet, and that is an amazing service to have.
Yeah.
Really, really important. You used that. Which other one did you use?
Now I'm going to give them all, not in the right order. So another thing I used was the wig service.
Yeah.
So within, 2 weeks of my first infusion of chemotherapy, not only did I have sepsis, but I had a bald head. So I went to the wig service and got a very lovely kind of blondish bob wig, which I'm not blonde or bob. So it was kind of nice to do something different. And the people there were very, very nice and made it, that's not a nice process to go through. I have wonderful hairdresser who over the years, even though I was living backwards and forwards, I always made sure I got my hair cut in Uddingston with my original hairdresser. And I phoned her up. Actually, my husband phoned her up when my hair was coming out in clumps and painful, uncomfortable at the same time. And she got me to go that evening and she shaved my head. So she waited till everybody was out, and I don't usually get upset. I feel a wee bit upset by that. I don't know why, but she was very lovely. So she did a really nice job of managing that as though it was completely normal to do it, as though it was a completely normal appointment. And then I got in touch with the wig service and the people there were great. And as I say, I got a lovely blonde wig. I didn't wear it very much. In fact, the only time I would wear it was because I wore hats out. It was at the winter time. It was autumn into winter. So I mainly ended up in a woolly hat. But what I would do is if somebody came to the door, because of course we were still getting loads of deliveries at that point, then I had it hanging on the top of the banister at the stairs.
Just grab it.
So literally I would put it on, I would come out, put it on, go and answer the door to UPS or whoever was delivering, and then it would go back on because it fitted nicely. It wasn't quite a wig stand, but it was that kind of stand. So I don't know if other people, like my husband, would get a fright when he walked by and there was hair was there. But so that was a great service. And again, I would really recommend it because it's made so easy for you. It's a difficult time. People recognise it's a difficult thing to happen, but they do such a nice job of it. And I would say just the cheerfulness of the volunteers. So even though that's not a service to be used, even though I never wanted a cup of tea or coffee, knowing that the lady was, wheeling it along, I actually knitted a lot during it because I became a flight risk. I had 22 infusions of chemo, and towards, by about session 8, I was thinking, I could just get up and walk out because you wait for a little while in what I called the chemo corridor. So in order to stop me from just getting up and walking out, which was a temptation, I took up knitting, which I hadn't done since I was a child. So whilst the lovely lady was going by and offering me tea and coffee, I was sitting knitting scarves. Lovely. So I ended up knitting 16 scarves.
Oh my goodness,
yeah, because I decided I'm a bit of an oddball, and I decided 16 months of treatment equals 16 scarves, even though I only started it partway through. But I made sure, so I knitted a scarf for my oncologist, for the lovely pharmacist. Nice thing to do. Well, it was a nice thing to do, but I think that the atmosphere's improved just by Beatson Cancer Charity volunteers being up and down the corridors, even if you don't want. When I would get chemo, often someone would come in to see, did you want a foot massage? And I never wanted anything like that. But just knowing it was there and knowing that there was somebody with a smiling face there really made a difference.
And they're so lovely and really so cheery. And it is that thing, they just pass, and it just adds a bit of brightness to your day. And humanity,
it takes a wee bit of the clinical nature of the space away. Yeah. And the final thing that I did is when I came to the end of my treatment, the last meeting I had with my oncologist was January of last year, and it was mentioned that there was the Fear of Recurrence courses that I could attend. So in the May of last year, I attended a 6-week Fear of Recurrence course, which I think was on a Thursday, and it was 2 hours every Thursday for 6 weeks, and you were with other people who'd been through cancer treatment, and there are two great women who run it, Fiona and Marta, and they just created a really great environment, and they shared really helpful breathing techniques and thinking techniques, and you were there with people who'd had the same experience as you. On the first workshop, or the first class, I guess, that we had, they shared some research, I think it was from the Netherlands, but I could be wrong, that shows kind of the stress levels and the anxiety of the person going through cancer treatment, and over time, and the stress levels and anxiety of the family members and friends of the people going through cancer treatment. So when the person going through cancer treatment begins, they're kind of down here because they're just coping, and their stress increases, and actually they're at their most stressed and anxious after treatment, whereas the family members start off at their most anxious, and then by the end of treatment they're thinking, this is great, my person's through it. But that's the point at which the person is actually struggling. So that was really helpful to help me understand why. And I didn't notice the support friends and family were trying to give me when I was just trying to get through treatment. And then you kind of wonder, where is everybody afterwards?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? And even with the treatment, because you have all these regular appointments, and suddenly those become fewer. But it's still all in your mind. And you are like, every twinge or anything that goes wrong, you think, oh, is it back? Or, or what is it? So that was really helpful.
Yes, it was helpful for me to understand as well the context of friends and family, as well as understanding my own context, that it made sense that I was at my most anxious now, because now I had some thinking space to realise what I'd been through and to try and process it. And as you say, the routine had gone. You're kind of cast adrift to hopefully live the rest of your life as best you can.
It's a good thing, but it's daunting.
Yes.
It is really daunting. And did those techniques help then, the breathing
I think they really
techniques?
did. I think they did. I learned how to put anxious thoughts on a leaf and for it to float down a river. So that was useful.
That. Yeah, I do that now.
I know. There's loads of stuff, but somehow the leaf down the river was the thing that I found quite useful to just to drop my anxious thoughts on. And what I would have to say is, at the end of those 6 weeks, Fiona and Marta said, now if there's ever anything, get in touch. And then I had something. So the back end of last year, I started to get some symptoms that needed to be investigated. So over the course of the December, I had an ultrasound, and then I had a CT scan in the January, and I had an MRI scan in the March, all building up to trying to find out what was going on. And what was going on was a solid mass in my abdomen.
Gosh, Gillian,
I then had some surgery, and it turned out to be benign. So the good news is everything was benign, and I'm through the surgery now. But I got back in touch with Fiona and Marta during that, and I'm very anxious about MRI scans. So I wanted to be able to cope with that kind of anxiety of the possibility of this being not benign. But I also needed some techniques to get myself through an MRI scan, because actually a number of years ago, I started saying no thank you to MRI scans to do with my MS, because all it told me was that the disease had progressed, but it didn't change any treatment outcomes. So it seemed not to make sense to me just to do that. It wasn't really useful in terms of treatment. It was just giving more data that was slightly unhelpful data. So I had said no more, never again. So of course then with breast cancer, I'd had a couple of MRI scans. Quite nice, because you're the other way around. You're actually facing down for those scans. And that was actually easier. So for this other scan, I was going to be old style, lying on my back, and I just couldn't imagine how I would get through it. So Marta, who is a psychologist who works for the Beatson, spent an hour on the phone with me going over some other techniques for thinking and breathing. And it was the easiest MRI scan I've ever had with having that input. Gosh. So I think, they're not even just there for the course. You can access so much support even a year after that.
How are you feeling now?
So I feel great in that I feel very grateful to have got through 16 months of treatment. I feel very grateful to have got through the recent surgery. I found great help from Beatson Cancer Charity. So I would say, I'm doing well. One thing we just talked about, so one of the reasons I'm here is because I've written a book, which I wrote before I started cancer treatment as part of my doctorate in creative writing. And book 2 should have been written immediately afterwards. But of course, what happened immediately after I wrote the first novel was that I then was diagnosed with breast cancer, and somehow chemo and writing didn't go together, and somehow brain fog that's lingered hasn't gone well. So I'm very frustrated at the lack of writing. But apart from that, I'm great.
But it'll come to you. And I think that's one of the things, I mean, you've done an incredible amount in your life. You sound very driven. It'll come back, but you do it in your own time. I found it very hard when people were like, you need to rest. And I think more than ever, I had this drive of, I need to be doing everything, but you do have to slow down a bit and be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
The book was really special as well because you've donated the profits from the book to the Beatson?
Yeah, so anything that should go to the author goes directly to Beatson Cancer Charity. So as I said, I wrote the book before being diagnosed with breast cancer. And it was just in that stage of, I got an agent, it was getting put out to publishers. It was at that stage when my life, as you said, just stopped, changed, went into a different, just changed direction completely. So my focus went off, so the book's called Brodie, went off my beloved Brodie and on to just getting through all of the different treatments. And yeah, as if by magic, right, I don't know, a few months after I finished my final treatment, just by chance, it was serendipity that through a mutual friend, a publisher got sight of Brodie, fell in love with it, and decided that he wanted to publish it. But I already had in my head, so because I'd kind of gone off the boil with it, at some point I thought it's never going to get published. I'm not focused, it's never going to get published, and nobody ever gets their books published, and it's ridiculous that I would even think it would get published. But I had this idea, I don't know, maybe sitting knitting in a waiting room at the Beatson, that if it ever did get published, then whatever money would come to me, and I thought £3 maybe, for the 3 copies, whatever, then I would give whatever I would get to Beatson Cancer Charity because, you would see things about people running marathons or people climbing mountains, and I knew I've already got MS. I wasn't going to be doing any of that anytime soon. But what I did have was a book. So if it ever got published, then I would give whatever should come to me to Beatson Cancer Charity. And lo and behold, it went out to the universe, and the universe came back with a publisher, which was very nice. And that's what's happened. So the author would get a cheque every 6 months, and the first 6-month cheque that went to the Beatson was £12,808.
Oh my goodness,
which was amazing. But that's also because we've done some fundraising round about the book, so it wasn't just the sales from the book. But and obviously other people have to be paid, the bookshops who sell it, the publisher who published it. But so my publisher's been amazing, Stephen Cameron, in 2 books, and he literally is just, covering his costs because he cares so much about the Beatson as well. So really all the profit that would have come to myself or Stephen is going to the Beatson.
Well, first of all, I want you to sell it. Tell me what Brodie's about so get it out there on the podcast.
Excellent. So Brodie is the story of 6 women whose lives intertwine over a period of 30 years. It starts in 1988. With the first character, Violet, being given the book by her aunt. All these women are connected because they all own a copy of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Right. And it's the same copy. And this copy of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, as perhaps all books do, is able to observe everything that goes on, is able to cast judgment on everything that goes on. So basically, I decided that as part of my doctorate, which was looking at the relationship between object and illness, because as someone who, even though my motor function is fine, often when you're in clinical settings, you would be wheeled about just in case. And I often found that people would have conversations over my head, so I would know all about who was going where at the weekend. So this gave me an idea. And also, when I was very first diagnosed, I had lost the feeling from my toes to my chest. So bed rest was something for many months that was prescribed because I couldn't feel the floor, for instance. I couldn't feel my body. It was as though someone had given me a local anaesthetic, like at the dentist, except it was my entire body from my chest down to my feet. Being out of bed was a wee bit unsafe. Although I still did it.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. It was a wee bit unsafe. But what I would notice is people would come up and visit me, and then all of the fun was happening somewhere that I wasn't. So I had this idea of a narrator who was an object, who couldn't follow the action, couldn't go with the people to the kitchen and have a glass of whatever my husband was giving them, who wasn't able to go out on the night out with the nurses who were talking about it. So that was the concept for the book. But really, it's just so... 1988, Violet gets given a copy of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and the story then is told by this copy of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. And just through sometimes misadventure, sometimes badness, Brodie changes hands and tells the story of each of the women into whose hands Brodie ends up. and the lives round about. And of course, nobody knows that the book is observing them, is telling the story. So people do all sorts of things in front of Brodie and say all sorts of things. So Brodie knows much more than anybody else does because people don't know they're being observed. So Brodie's quite gossipy, leans into a bit of the dark humour of Muriel Spark and the Prime Miss Jean Brodie. It's a bit of an homage. I love Spark. So it's a bit of an homage to Muriel Spark as well.
Well, it sounds brilliant. And not only a great read, but doing great things for the charity as well. Was it important to you to give something back? Was that in you?
It really was. And I can't really explain why. I think you become so grateful for everything. And also, as we discussed, you don't really know what your longevity is anymore. So I wanted to be able to make a difference. And it felt, and I didn't think that, so Brodie's done well and has sold, people have been very kind in terms of reviews of Brodie and people buying Brodie, which is brilliant. And I didn't know that, in the first 6 months, the Beatson would get £12,000. That's amazing. And I'm so happy about it.
Good.
But it's that I couldn't have ever known about. But it did feel like I love very much my book, and it felt like I was giving something of that love back.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing to do. What have you got coming up next? So you're going to try and write. The writing will hopefully come back. But what else are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, so mainly trying to write. That's what, having done a doctorate in creative writing, it seems like that's what I should be doing at the moment. And I'm doing other bits of writing though, so I've been involved in other things, and I've written more non-fiction recently, which is not like me. So I have been writing, but not necessarily what I want to write. So I've been involved with something called Death Rights, which is spelt with a W, that kind of rights. So I've been involved in that for a couple of years, and actually, so this project, it's a collective of writers who are interested in death, dying, grieving, but also in illness. So the reason that I got involved, in fact, maybe 4 years ago, was because my main supervisor of my PhD was involved in running the project.
Right.
And I was involved in it through writing about illness and the experience of illness, and writing about clinical spaces and trying to bring humanity to clinical spaces, and maybe trying to help others understand what it feels like to be the person in that situation, to try and promote empathy. So that was what I wrote about before. And then I found myself writing a lot about death. So I actually leaned right into Death Rights. So I've written some things for them, so something for an anthology. I spoke recently at the symposium that they had. So I'm still doing things in and about. I'm actually going back to my old school. Shout out for St Ninians in Kirkintilloch. So I'm going back there to do a little talk, just to spend a little bit of time with what's now called the Advanced Higher English. Back in my day, it was 6th year studies English. Yeah. So I'm going to do a wee talk to them. So things like that. I'm doing a little bit. I've done some work before, voluntary work for Glasgow Women's Library. So I'm doing something for them in September as well. So things like that seem to break up my week.
Gillian, finally, for anyone who does receive the devastating news that they've got cancer, and how would you say to them, or what would you say to them about coping? What's kind of been your techniques? Is it to find things like the services the Beatson Cancer Charity offer? I mean, everybody is different, but I think seeking something like that out can be a massive help, can't it?
Yeah, I think that's probably the first thing I would say is, be kind to yourself. Take some time to just let the news settle in and reach out for whatever help you can get. I mean, family and friends are there and want to help. But as we discussed, sometimes it's easier for the person who's about to go through treatment if they can reach out to other people for help. But I would say take whatever help is on offer. Know that people care. I think that's something really to be aware of. It can be a very lonely experience, but it doesn't need to be as lonely as it can be. There's lots of help and support out there. So please reach out and access it.
Yeah. Well, listen, you have been brilliant. Cannot wait to read that next book. And always up for a knitted scarf if you're getting those knitting needles back out again. So keep me
I will
posted.
do. Just give me the colour.
Any colour at all. Excellent. Listen, thank you so much. Keep well, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And if you would like any more information about the services on offer from the Beatson, then check out beatsoncancercharity.org.